This is the Gemara for Hoshana Rabbah, Daf Kuv Beis Amar Aleph. We're continuing the discussion between Rav Yechon and Rish Lakish, arguing when a person obligates themselves without really a shtar, but in front of witnesses, doesn't have the full, veracity of a shtar. They didn't make a kinyan, and is it obligate them or not? Tashma, bring another proof. Kosav l'kohen, he writes to a kohen. Shani chayu l'chamish shloim, he writes to a kohen that I owe you 5 shloim. He has a son that has to be redeemed, but he writes, I owe you 5 shloim. I owe you 5 shloim can mean out of a loan. I owe you 5 shloim because of the pidyon, but he wrote it in a document. He wrote it in a shtar. So he has to give 5 shloim. So what did you do? He said, I'm giving you 5 shloim, documented it, didn't really write his name, nor did he have witnesses assigned or anything like that. And yet he's obligated to give the 5 shloim. Doesn't that show that that's like a B'yechin is correct? And yet, yet his son will not be redeemed. We'll come back to that soon. Why if he has to give 5 shloim and he gave it, why should his son be redeemed? So the Gemara and shiny. So right now we think the reason is because the 5 shloim has to do with a loan rather than the pidyon. Says the Gemara, no. Shiny Hashem the Meshumlim and Raisa. You know, over here the document is good enough because the Torah says nothing was a loan. You owe 5 shloim, and then you put down on the paper, I owe you 5 shloim, and we'll see in a minute. So why did you write it down if the halacha says you have to give 5 shloim to the Torah? But the Meshumlim and Raisa, since the Torah obligates you, so therefore whatever you wrote, no matter how flimsy it is good enough. Says the Gemara, what in the world do you write it for? Because you have to select a coin. You have a right to choose any coin you want. So you write it to this coin, like Makira Kohun or whatever relative, a friend. I am obligating myself to you. So if so, Benoi, the son, why isn't it redeemed? Since the Torah obligates you, and all you did is put it in a star, you recorded it, even though it's not really a proper star, but you tell me it has a full validity of a star because the Torah obligated. So why in the world are you telling me that this, even though you're giving, now you have to give the 5 shloim, but you have to give another 5 shloim to redeem your son? What's the logic in that? So you want to do Ula, this follows Ula. What did Ula say? Because Ula said, if our Torah, according to the Torah Padi, of course it's redeemed. You gave 5 shloim. But when, once you give the money. Well, my time, why did they say B'nai Eino Padi? So why and what did they say that the son is not redeemed? Gizeda, because we are worried. If a person owes me money, and I have a document, he owes me $100. I take that document, I say, give it to the coin. I say, here, this is yours. I want to redeem my son. We learn now that you cannot use, you can only use real money. You cannot use a star, you cannot use karka, you cannot use a vodim. You cannot use these things to redeem your child. And if you're going to use this, if you're going to have this document here, people don't understand the nuances, and they're going to think that if this document, I owe you, is good enough, then any loan document will be good enough, and errors will come about. And therefore, we decide, you know what? You still owe the $5. You wrote clearly in the document, but you still have to give another five shloim for the redemption of your son. People say, people think that you can redeem with a star. In fact, this is a machlekes of Tanaim. This argument of Yechon Shlakish, you can say, is an argument of Tanaim. What is that? Now you have a guarantor. A person guarantees the loan, otherwise the lender would never lend the money. But what happened over here was, and if there's a guarantor, you would put that into the document itself, and then the Eidim would sign right beneath that. But what happened here, this is an Arev that came Acha Chitim Shtar. In other words, the Eidim signed the loan, and then the following day, the lender managed to get a guarantor for this loan. So the guarantor signed below, he signed his guarantee beneath the signatures of the witnesses. And this is important because then you can definitely say the loan was not granted on account of this guarantee, because you gave the loan before even the guarantee happened. But nevertheless, it's there documented. So we have an argument. How do we treat this section of the shtar, which is not really corroborated by witnesses? In other words, it doesn't have the full veracity of a shtar. It's more like what we learned before, a document that was written, I owe you, the Orah was writing, I owe you, and so on, but nothing more than that. So I think if a guarantor writes signs after the shtar already was signed, below the signature of the Eidim, and he says this and this, and this says that the Orah accepted the guarantee to guarantee it, and he admits, he doesn't deny it. So then is that you can collect, if the borrower has the money, you can go to this guarantor and collect, but only from his personal assets, not from properties that he unsold, because there's no real shtar here. And then it came from Shmuel. He said, yes, it has, it's you indebted yourself, you're obligated yourself, but you can only go to you. No. You cannot, the lender cannot go back to this guarantor. Now, why not? He says, he said, why not? He wrote in the star that he is a guarantor. Let me ask a question. Let's say you're walking down the street, you see two people fighting, and one person is strangling the other person. And you saw it. Release him. And I will reimburse you. I'll give you whatever he owes you. Potter. Then he releases him, and he turns in, and after the guy runs away, flees, he turns to him and says, no, pay me. He doesn't have to. You never lent him the money because of me. You didn't know I existed. I just said something. So what? Talk is cheap. How am I obligated to pay you? So the same thing over here, because the order put it on the star after the witness side, doesn't mean anything. So Lame, it seems Rabbi Yechon that even though it's not a proper star, if he said, I'll owe you your chayiv, and the Shlaki said bananas. The Shlaki said, you're like bananas. This Gemara here seems a bit more like Rabbeinu Tam. We're talking about bringing upon himself a new obligation rather than talking about a history. And you're right. According to bananas, definitely there's no argument. Banana says that it has no validity. There's no obligation here, so there's no question. Rabbi Yechon will agree. According to bananas, you're not chayiv. He please only argue with Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Yechon says, I hold like Rabbi Shmuel. Shmuel clearly says that the Arab is obligated to pay. The Shlach says no. Ad kanla coming from Hassam el nishaylish with the Isa. You know why that he holds? Rabbi Shmuel says because that generally in Arab there's a shibuda deraisa generally, and because he signed over here. An Arab generally is meshubit from the Torah to pay, and because he over here is signed at the bottom, so he says, okay, it's even though it's not a perfect star, it's not a perfect scenario. Nevertheless, you're obligated to pay. But over here, to say that I owe you $100, because Shibud says that there's nothing there, and therefore there's have an argument whether there's any validity to the star when it wasn't signed properly. There was no kinyan whatsoever. But an Arab generally, an Arab is responsible, and you can go to the Arab to collect on the loan. Gufa, let's analyze this thing he's talking about tonight. They have a discussion. How much you give me for your son? So much. We're in Avkuf Beis, Amid Beis, about 7 lines from the top of the page. So Rav Gidl said, name Rav. When people have their children getting married, they sit down, they negotiate, and each one says how much they're giving to the marriage towards the future lives together, and they make commitments. And then no document was signed, no kinyan was made, but on that basis, the children got engaged. Konu, that everything that they spoke about is now confirmed, and it's as if it was transacted. These are the exceptions where you just said something and you're already bound by it. Amar Rava, says Rava. Mistabra milsa de Rav. First of all, in logic, you would think this makes sense. But naira, if your daughter is a naira, so when you transact something, I have to get something in return. With the whole idea of chalipin is we swap. I get one thing and you get something in return. If I promise to give $1,000 to my daughter towards the future, life together, what am I getting in return? So he says, I'll tell you, it makes sense if your daughter is a girl getting married to come a naira where the money of the kedushin ends up with the father, so he's getting the benefit of the kedushin itself, the engagement money. The kamati anoliyot, he's getting engagement money. Therefore, and he's swapping with that. He said, you know what? I'm going to give money towards my daughter's marriage. But once she's 12 and a half years old, when you're not entitled to receive, she gets married, she can choose whoever she wants to marry, and she receives the kedushin. The lamati anoliyot, the father gets no benefit whatsoever. Like. Maybe then it doesn't. A word is not a word because what's he getting in exchange? So that's what you would think. But with the Kim, I can swear, Omar Rav, that Rav meant afilu begenis. Even if the girl is an adult and everything else, the father gets something. What does he get? Nachas. He gets nachas, and that nachas, that pleasure that he gets to see his daughter getting married, is for that he's prepared to give whatever it takes, and therefore it's a valid transaction. And I'll prove it to you. Because the father of the daughter, let's say, is only talking about a naira. He gets the kedushin. But the father of the son, who also gives commitments, what does he get? Nothing. The son pays, doesn't get by kedushin. It's the son who gives to the wife. Not the wife gives to the son. So the Eloi Tema Hachi, you don't say that. The father of the son, what does he get? Ella, Bahi Hana, that pleasure. The Kamishani Ahadodi Gamri Umakla Dodi. Vichatni Adodi, with that pleasure that they're going ahead to get engaged, there's no greater pleasure. And therefore that's enough to cement that commitment. Okay, let me ask you a question. How far do we take? You're saying you can record this and has another contract, but how far do we go? Can you use this contract if the father of the kala, the father of the chassan, for whatever reason, no longer have the assets and cannot keep their word? Can you go to any purchaser that purchased property after that date, post that date? So can you write them down? Or you shouldn't write it down. If you hold that this contract has a full legitimacy of a contract, then you can write it down because you could go into chasam shabadim, nobody gets cheated. But if you hold that this contract does not have a full din of a contract, and therefore you cannot go into chasam shabadim, then you shouldn't write it down because people don't really know the difference. They'll see the contract, they'll think that the buyer will give up the property when it's not fair. Omele, he said. So Ravashi said, you should not write it down because you cannot collect from the chasam mishabadim with this property because at the end of the day there was no kinyan made. So you cannot collect from the chasam mishabadim. If don't write it in the first place, don't write it down. They have to keep their word, but don't document it. Okay, Ezel has a question. It says Hapikrin. We learned in our Mishnah, the smart ones, who promised to take care of their stepdaughter, if they want to be really clever, but they should make sure they should add a clause and say, I'm only going to take care of our stepdaughter while we're married. We're not going to marry for 6 months, you walk away, and then I got to take care of your kids. Right. When? As long as we're married. So he says clearly from here that they used to write it down. You say when it comes to all these arrangements, they didn't write it down. It's clear in the mission, they wrote it down, even though it wasn't really a proper document. It's like an IOU. Says the Gemara, my kaisvin, even though the Mishnah uses the word kaisvin, it means oimrim. They said. Says the Gemara, where do you find that saying is like writing? Yes. Because Latnan we learned. If a person writes to his wife, I don't have anything to do with your assets. The Torah of Chiyah, the Braisa, he quotes the same Mishnah, but he changes, he revises the word Kaisev to the word ha'omer. So we see that Kaisev can mean sometimes saying. Okay, so it proves nothing. Our Mishnah didn't document it, they just said it. We don't want you to document it because you don't have the right to collect for the Chasam Shabbatim, and people might make a mistake and will try to collect for the Chasam Shabbatim. So you want to touch by coming here. Says, you do not write a contract of Edison unless both of them agree. So right now the Gemara thinks we're talking about that Tanoim. We're talking about the Tanoim where they both sit down, they agree, work out all the arrangements, and both parents obviously have to agree. Hamadash neighbor, they both agree. Then Kaisin sounds like me that you do right. It says ain't you don't write, but if you agree, you do right. Clearly you're right, even though all they did was they said. Says the Gemara, it must be that this document you can collect from the Chasam Shabbatim, not like Ravashi. Says the Gemara, who told you that story Edison? So the Gemara asked, my lab story Psikta. So the Gemara like, no. Who told you we're talking about story Psikta? We're not talking about Tanoim. Story Edison Mamish. The first Mishnah Kedusha we're going to learn, Aisha Nikas V'Shleisha Drachim. One of them is Kesef, money, one of them is Shtar, a document. We're talking here about a document of getting married. That's what we're talking about here. And you kind of obviously write the document, even though you know that eventually you want to marry this girl, but you didn't ask her yet, and you want to be already certain, so you have a cipher right for you, a shtar with her name and everything else, and you plan to pop the question, and hopefully she says yes, and then you right away give her a shtar before she changes her mind. That's no good. The shtar has to be written with dash name in the first place. Says the Gemara, like a papa, because Ashravi and Ashravi Idma, we learned Kosul Lishma, if he wrote the shtar, Erison, having her in mind, but Shalom Medait, he didn't inform her at the time that he's doing that. Rabbi said Mekadesh is Mekadesh, because the main thing is when you give it to her. And a papa, and you wrote it Lishma. And a papa Ashravi ain't a Mekadesh, because when you write, you have to consult her from the beginning. Again, no proof either way regarding the Tanoim when they said to you, can you write it down or not? And in other words, if you could write it down, that means you could collect from the Chasam Shabbatim. If you don't write it down, it means you cannot collect from the Chasam Shabbatim. Toshma coming here, Meisu, it says if the parents die, but they say and the Zain is been Chasim and they All the other girls, including the other girls from this first wife, from this husband, their daughters only collected the chasm nechayim as heirs. They can only collect the chasm nechayim from the zaynis. But she's not in there. She is. There's a debt on the estate. Because she's a bal chayv. So we see from here that she has the right to collect from the chasm shabadim. Obviously, she has a document. Where did she get this document? Obviously, the husband said to the wife, "This is what I'm going to do," and that's strong enough, as if in front of witnesses, and therefore it's like a document, a proof to Rabbi, a proof that you can. Going back to Rabbi Yechon before, but this becomes like sorry. So we say on the top page that you could write it down and you could collect from the chassim mishabadim, not like Rabbi, but like Rabbi. No, here we're talking about you actually made a transaction. It's not just just saying something or wrote an IOU. They actually made a kinyan. That's why they can collect the chashibadim. If he made a kinyan, all the agreements he made, then for his daughters as well, he would have made a kinyan that he is going to feed his natural daughters, his biological daughters. He also would have made a kinyan that he would take care of them. So how come they only get b'nei? So we answer, he only made a kinyan when it came to his stepdaughter. Didn't make a kinyan when it came to his own daughters, and therefore they can only collect from bnei chayrin, but the stepdaughter can go mishabad. Says the Gemara, my posture. What's the logic in that? Why did you decide that why did the Mishnah decide for his stepdaughter he made a kinyan, but for all the other daughters he didn't? Says the Gemara, and not only that, in the Kesuvos it says, "I'll take care of your daughters and so on, of our daughters and so on and so forth." So how come that part of the thing? We say can only collect minchayim, but the stepdaughter part of that Kesuvos, she can collect mishabadi. What's going on here? This part he made a kinyan for. This part he didn't make kinyan. Doesn't make sense. So I'll tell you, he made a kinyan for everything, but the kinyan for his biological daughters are ineffective. The kinyan for his stepdaughter is effective. Why? Very simple. She was already born, the stepdaughter, at the time of the kinyan. That's what it was. She was born with another husband. Therefore, Mahan Kinyan. The kinyan happened when she was already existing in this world. But Banas, the future daughters that he will have with this woman, the Lohavi Bishas Kinyan, they weren't around at the time when they made this agreement. Therefore, Mahan Kinyan. The kinyan, he made a kinyan, but the kinyan is ineffective. Says the Gemara, what does it mean? But I can come up with a case where where the other daughters also existed. And yet the Mishnah seems to say unequivocally that it never works for the other daughters. How could it be that the other daughters were also in existence? What happens if he married this woman and she had a kid from somewhere else and they together had kids, then they got divorced and then they remarried again? So the second time when they remarried, they made this deal and there were stepdaughters alive, but so too the other daughters. So how come the stepdaughter is entitled to collect from the chasam shabadim because there was a kinyan? That same kinyan should also be effective for the other daughters, that they should be able to collect from the chasam mishabadim. So the Gemara, what do you mean? Milas kinyan to have b'shas. It could also be talking about there was a kinyan. Heichadami, how you're going to go the girsha of a hadra, they divorced and they came back. So the Gemara follows. When it comes to a stepdaughter, there's no rule that says that you have to take care of your stepdaughter. It's just an agreement between them and the kinyan. So the kinyan is effective because otherwise, why pay for her? But when it comes to his biological daughters, the East of Bezin, he anyway has to take care of them because the law is that you have to take care of your children and you have to take care of your wife and so on. Then the kinyan is not effective. Says the Gemara, so Mikra Gora. So what's that? But you made a kinyan. Why should it be any worse? You know why his biological daughters, we say that you don't, they cannot collect the chashabadim? Because the law says he had to take care of them. The law says that. We are concerned that there's possibility you gave them already some kind of security. You already paid them off a little bit. And therefore you have no right to go to a leker to collect money because maybe the father took care of them. I think in the Eastern B'nai Bezin, Ema would say Tzroni Atfasinu. Maybe before this guy, we're talking about Mesa, they died. Maybe before he died, he gave them some money, and therefore, because he gave them some money, how can they collect? And they cannot go now to the Yosher because you cannot anything which they would have to swear that they did not receive. They cannot, that does not form part of a Yerusha. Anything that requires a shvur does not form part of a Yerusha, and therefore they can only collect from Bnei Chayim. Lo yemer harishan. So it says over there that the first person should say, well, there's a second person that he'll take care of her. Amar Rav Chizda, from here learn out, Bas Eitzel Ima. Now, this is a very interesting Gemara. It's actually fascinating Gemara in Halacha. When if families split up, and there's all kinds of in the courts forever. Well, who gets custody of the child, visitation rights, and should it be the mother, should it be the father, and what payment should it be, and so on. So here in Halacha, the whole basis in Halacha is based on the next few lines in the Gemara. Even the Gemara is not so clear, but it's based on this Gemara here. And it follows. Amr Chizah says, Zeis Oimeres. From here we learn out that Bas Eitzel Ima, that generally speaking, it says here that the father has to bring the food to where the mother. The father cannot say, bring her to my house and I'll take care of her. No. Even if she divorced you, and you're divorced, and she married somebody else, doesn't matter. You still have to fulfill your obligation and bring it to her house. In other words, where's the daughter with who? With the mother, not with the father. So from here you learn out, Bas Eitzel Ima, that the daughter goes with the mother. Says the Gemara, and what age? Any age. We have a rule that a father has to support his kids. We had it before in Kesuvos Daf, until 6 years old, and over 6 years old, it's tzedakah. When it comes to a daughter, it doesn't matter what age, she goes with her mother. Says the Gemara, who told you? Who told you that we're talking about an adult girl here? And we don't say that that the girl should go back to her family. If the father died, we say the Yisaimim have to bring it to her. We don't say she should move in with her brothers and so on. No, she can stay with her mother. And we're saying all ages. How do you know? How do you know talking about all ages? Dilma Bigtana, maybe we're talking about, maybe really if the father is supporting or the state is supporting the girl, maybe the girl stays with the father's family. Maybe. How come over here we're saying that the girl is with the mother? Because maybe we're talking about a very young girl, and so what? And because of Maisa Shahaya, because of a terrible tragedy that once happened. And what is that? That the Tanya we learned, Misha Mays, if somebody died, and he had been cotton, he left behind a young boy, is Yosha of and the heirs say, we want to raise, the father's family says, no difference divorce or death, but this is the case. The children say, we wanted her to come over to us. The Ima Aimedes, he hate Benny God, let's say, as a boy, and the mother said, I want the boy by me. We give it to the mother, to her, she takes custody, and not to his family. And why? Because Maisa Haya once happened, the Shachtu Erev Hayem, and they shechted her on that day, or others say Erev Pesach. Erev Arisha, sorry. Shachtu Erev Arisha, the first night, and others say Erev Pesach. Erev HaPesach. And what happened was, because he was there, they have to provide for him. He was eating away he's going to eat away all the assets. So they do was they made sure he died that night, and therefore it won't impact them on the assets. As a result of that, they said, we don't trust the father's family, and therefore the boy stays with the mother. Says the Gemara, Im Kain, if so, so what are you telling me? That's only by a young kid stays with the mother, but the kid is a bit older, then maybe does shift to the father's family. Im Kain, if so, listen, let it just say, if there's a difference between an older child and a younger child, let it just say, Lemakim Shehi. Just say that the father has to bring the mezainis to wherever she happens to end up. If we're talking, and that was no, if you're talking about an adult, she'll be with her father's family. And if you're talking about a minor or a young kid, it'll be with the mother's family. Says the Gemara, my lemokim, what do you mean lemokim she'ima? What do you mean? Why does the Mishnah say to the place that the mother is? To teach you what Rabbi Chizah said, Shamat mina bas eitzel eim loishnak doyle loishnak tana. When it comes to a daughter, it makes no difference older or younger. So if you learn this Gemara, what does it seem to the Gemara? That who gets custody of the child, the mother, regardless, and the father still has to provide for her. The father provides for her. However, it's clearly not so, because the Gemara says bas. What about ben? So basically, it comes like this. When it comes to a bas, the daughter stays with the mother. When it comes to a son, because there's a mitzvah on the father to teach his son Torah, so the rule is that the son goes to the father. However, the first few years of raising the child, we say it goes to the mother. Then the Shulchan Aruch says, but if the Bezdin feels that it's better for the child to be, let's say, with the daughter, with the father, then the Bezdin can move the child to the father. And then there's a machlekes of paskim. What's it talking about here? Does the child have an opinion? In fact, the Chelkas Mechayki and Beis Shmuel both say that depends. When we say that the Bezdin has the right to decide that the child should be transferred to one of the parents, let's say to the father, is only if the girl has no opinion. They ask the girl, where would you rather stay? She's nonchalant about the whole thing. Yeah, there makes no difference, both the parents. But if the girl clearly says, I want to be with my mother, then it stays with the mother, and that no Bezdin, they say no Bezdin has the right to say, we think it's better for the girl to be with her father. If she clearly says, I want to be with my mother. When it comes to a son, there's a whole issue. And when it comes to son, if the son says he wants to be the mother, so many poskim hold to stay with the mother. If the son is nonchalant, we take it to the father because the mitzvah of teaching Torah. And then many say that if they're in the same city, so the father, if he wants, the Chalkim says he can teach Torah anyway. But if she lives in a different city, then the mitzvah of teaching Talmud Torah to your son overrides other things, and you should bring him to the father. Others say the Bezdin should evaluate every case on its merits, and there shouldn't be these strict rules. But that's how halacha views it. So there's a difference in a girl and a boy, and the variable that comes in is the idea of teaching Torah, mitzvah of learning Torah. We'll stop here.